Stop the tape. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a knife. The cameras froze. The audience held their breath. For 34 years, the Dr. Phil show had aired thousands of episodes, but what was about to happen behind that curtain would become one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. Michael sat in the guest chair, his hands trembling, staring at an old photograph. 58 years old, gray at the temples, wearing a simple button-down shirt that he'd ironed 3 times that morning. He didn't know why Dr. Phil had invited him. He didn't know what was coming. But he was about to find out that sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it walks through a door when you least expect it. The photograph in his hands showed 2 boys. 7 and 9 years old. Arms around each other. Smiling like the world would never hurt them. That was 1989. Before everything fell apart. Before the fight that tore a family in half. Before 35 years of silence. When Dr. Phil stopped that recording, nobody in the studio knew what he was about to do. But the man waiting backstage had been waiting for this moment for more than 3 decades. 3 weeks earlier, Michael had written a letter to the Dr. Phil show. Not for himself. For his daughter. She was getting married in 6 months, and she'd asked him a question that broke his heart. "Dad, why don't I have an uncle?" Michael had no answer. Or rather, he had an answer he'd been avoiding for 35 years. He had a brother. Somewhere. A brother he hadn't spoken to since 1989. A brother whose name he couldn't say out loud without feeling like he'd swallowed broken glass. The fight had been over nothing. That's what made it worse. A family business. A disagreement about money. Words said in anger that could never be taken back. Their father had died trying to reconcile them. Their mother had spent her last years begging them to talk. But pride is a prison, and both brothers had chosen to serve their sentence rather than admit they were wrong. Michael's letter was simple. "Dr. Phil, I don't know where my brother is. I don't know if he'd even want to see me. But my daughter deserves to have her uncle at her wedding. I've carried this guilt for 35 years. I'm ready to let it go. Can you help me find him?" The production team spent 2 weeks searching. Phone calls. Public records. Social media deep dives. And then they found him. David. 60 years old. Living 2 states away. Working as a high school teacher. Never married. And when they called him, when they told him his brother wanted to reconnect, David didn't hesitate. His voice cracked on the phone. "I've been waiting for this call my whole life." But Michael didn't know any of this. As he walked onto that stage, he thought he was there for therapy. For advice. For Dr. Phil to tell him how to move forward. He had no idea his brother was 15 feet away, behind a curtain, listening to every word. Dr. Phil started gently. "Michael, tell me about your brother." Michael's eyes filled immediately. I don't talk about him much." "Why not?" "Because it hurts too much. Because I was stupid. Because I let my ego destroy the most important relationship I ever had." His voice broke. "We were best friends, Dr. Phil. We did everything together. And I threw it away over something that doesn't even matter anymore." The audience was silent. Some were crying. Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Michael, if you could say something to your brother right now, what would it be?" Michael looked down at the photograph in his hands. The 2 boys. The ones who didn't know what was coming. "I'd tell him I'm sorry. I'd tell him I miss him every single day. I'd tell him that I don't care about being right anymore. I just want my brother back." That's when Dr. Phil stopped the tape. "Michael," Dr. Phil said slowly, standing up from his chair, "there's something you need to know. You say you don't know where your brother is. You say you don't know if he'd want to see you." Dr. Phil walked toward the side of the stage. "But what if I told you that your brother has been looking for you too? What if I told you he never stopped thinking about you?" Michael's face went white. "What are you saying?" Dr. Phil turned to the production crew. "Bring him in." The studio went completely silent. You could hear Michael's breathing from the front row. And then the curtain moved. David stepped onto the stage. 60 years old. Taller than Michael remembered. Grayer. But the eyes were the same. The face was the same. 35 years collapsed into a single moment. Two brothers who'd spent more than 3 decades apart were suddenly 10 feet from each other, and neither of them could move. Michael stood up, the photograph falling from his hands. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. David took a step forward, then stopped, his own face crumbling with emotion. Dr. Phil stood between them, his voice soft. "Michael, this is your brother. David, this is the man you've been waiting to see for 35 years. I'm going to step back now. The rest is up to you." For a moment, nothing happened. The audience held its breath. The cameras captured every second. And then Michael whispered one word. "David?" David's voice broke. "Mikey." That was all it took. Michael crossed the distance in 3 steps and threw his arms around his brother. David grabbed him back, and both men collapsed into each other, sobbing openly. 35 years of anger, regret, and loneliness poured out in a single embrace. The audience erupted in tears and applause. Dr. Phil stepped back, his own eyes glistening, letting the brothers have their moment. They stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only 2 minutes. 2 men who'd lost so much time. 2 men who'd carried so much pain. And now, finally, 2 brothers who were home. When they finally pulled apart, neither could speak. They just looked at each other, laughing through tears, touching each other's faces like they couldn't believe it was real. Michael kept saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And David kept saying, "I know. I know. Me too." Dr. Phil waited until they sat down, side by side in the chairs, still holding hands like they were afraid to let go. "Gentlemen," he said gently, "tell me what this feels like." Michael wiped his face with his sleeve. "It feels like I can breathe again. Like I'd been holding my breath for 35 years and I finally let it out." David nodded. "I didn't realize how much I missed him until right now. I thought I'd moved on. I thought I was fine. But I wasn't fine. I was just surviving. And now I feel alive again." Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Michael, you said your daughter's getting married? She wanted to know why she didn't have an uncle. What are you going to tell her now?" Michael looked at David, and a smile broke through the tears. "I'm going to tell her she does have an uncle. And he's going to walk her down the aisle with me." David's eyes widened. "You mean that?" "I mean it. If you'll do it." David didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The audience exploded again. Dr. Phil stood, and both brothers stood with him. "This," Dr. Phil said, his voice thick with emotion, "is why we do this show. Not for the drama. Not for the conflict. But for moments like this. When 2 people who love each other find their way back home. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." After the cameras stopped rolling, the brothers stayed in the studio for another hour. They sat in those chairs and talked. About everything. About nothing. About their parents. About the fight. About all the years they'd lost. Dr. Phil sat with them, listening, guiding, making sure they understood that reconciliation wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about rebuilding. "You two have a lot of catching up to do," Dr. Phil said. 35 years doesn't disappear in an afternoon. But today is the first step. And it's the most important one. Michael pulled out his phone and showed David photos of his daughter. David showed Michael pictures of his students. They laughed. They cried. They made plans. David would fly out for the wedding. They'd have dinner. They'd meet each other's lives. They'd start over. Before they left, Dr. Phil handed Michael something. The old photograph. The one that had fallen during the reunion. "Keep this," Dr. Phil said. "But don't just look at the past. Use it to remember why the future matters." Michael took the photo, but he didn't look at it. He looked at David. "I don't need a picture anymore. I have the real thing. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He decided this reunion deserved something more. 2 weeks later, Dr. Phil's team flew Michael and David to a grief counselor who specialized in family reconciliation. The show paid for 6 months of joint therapy sessions. Not because they had to, but because Dr. Phil understood that healing doesn't happen in a single afternoon. It's a process. And these brothers deserve support. The counselor later told the production team that the first session was the hardest. Michael and David had to confront the real reasons they'd stayed apart so long. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about shame. About not knowing how to come back from something so painful. About fearing rejection. But session by session, they rebuilt what they'd lost. By the time the wedding came around, David wasn't just attending. He was the best man. He stood beside his brother at the altar and gave a speech that left everyone in tears. He talked about second chances. About forgiveness. About how the greatest gift his niece had given him wasn't an invitation to her wedding. It was an invitation back into his family. Michael's daughter later wrote to Dr. Phil, "Thank you for giving me my uncle. But more than that, thank you for giving my dad his brother back. I've never seen him smile like this. You didn't just reunite two people. You've healed the family." But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. 6 months after the reunion, David called Dr. Phil's office with news. He'd been diagnosed with early-stage cancer. Treatable, but serious. And the first person he told, after his doctors, was Michael. The brother he'd been estranged from for 35 years was now the person he trusted most in the world. Michael dropped everything. He moved into David's apartment during treatment. He drove him to chemotherapy appointments. He sat with him through the hard nights. He was there for every scan, every result, every moment of fear. And when David's hair fell out, Michael shaved his own head in solidarity. Dr. Phil visited them during this time. He brought cameras, but not for a show. Just to document something important. He sat with the brothers and asked them what they'd learned. David spoke first. "I learned that pride almost cost me everything. If I'd stayed angry, if I'd stayed stubborn, I'd be going through this alone. But because of you, Dr. Phil, because you brought us back together, I have my brother. And that's the only reason I'm going to beat this." Michael nodded. "I learned that time doesn't heal wounds. Action does. You have to make the choice to forgive. You have to make the choice to come back. And sometimes you need someone like Dr. Phil to create the moment where that choice becomes possible." Dr. Phil looked at them both. "Gentlemen, you've given each other the greatest gift there is. Not just reconciliation, but presence. You're here for each other now. And that matters more than anything." David went into remission 4 months later. The doctor said his positive attitude and strong support system were key factors in his recovery. Michael never left his side. And when David got the all clear, the first thing they did was call Dr. Phil to say thank you. The brothers still talk every day. Michael's daughter is expecting her first child, and David will be the godfather. They've made up for some of the lost time, but more importantly, they've stopped mourning what they missed and started celebrating what they have now. Dr. Phil keeps that old photograph in his office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes, all people need is a bridge. Someone willing to say, "Stop the tape. Let's do something that matters." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The lesson Michael and David taught isn't complicated. It's simple. Life is short. Grudges are heavy. And the people we push away are often the ones we need the most. 35 years is a long time to carry anger. But it only takes a moment to let it go. Dr. Phil later reflected on this reunion during an interview. "We do hundreds of shows. We tackle every issue you can imagine. But the moments that matter most are the ones where we remind people that connection is everything." Michael and David didn't need therapy. They needed permission. Permission to stop punishing themselves. Permission to come home. And sometimes, that's all any of us really need. The photograph of the two boys is still in Michael's wallet. But now, next to it, there's a new photo. Two men. Brothers. Standing side by side at a wedding. Smiling. Like the world will never hurt them again. Because this time, they won't let it. This reunion wasn't just about two brothers. It was about everyone watching who's ever lost someone they loved to pride, to time, to silence. It was a reminder that it's never too late. That healing is possible. That forgiveness is a choice. And that sometimes, all you need is someone to stop the tape and give you the chance to make things right. Dr. Phil gave Michael and David that chance. And they took it. Not just for themselves, but for their family. For the daughter who wanted her uncle. For the students who gained a happier teacher. For everyone who witnessed that moment and realized they had their own calls to make, their own apologies to offer, their own bridges to rebuild. Because in the end, that's what the best moments in television do. They don't just entertain. They inspire. They challenge. They remind us that we're all connected. And that the greatest stories aren't about conflict. They're about coming home.